Let's get started here. Let's see. This journey, like I say, is going to be basic, but it's my journey, and I will go through that just a little bit. Why was there a global flood in the days of Noah? Word says, increased corruption on the earth. The Lord saw that there was wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. And I am sorry, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Why was it a worldwide flood? Was it a worldwide flood? That's the question, not why. We know why. We just talked about that. Was it? And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Was it a worldwide flood? For behold, I will bring flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that was on earth shall die. Was it a worldwide flood? And the waters prevailed so mightily in the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heavens were covered. A lot of people wonder about that. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 22 feet. Above Mount Everest? No, there was no Mount Everest then. Did everything and everyone die? Yes. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and livestock, animals, all swarming things, creatures that swarm in the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land and whose nostrils had the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground. Man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Who lived? Only Noah was left, and those who were with him on the ark. So, does the Bible indicate that Noah's flood was a worldwide flood? The entire earth was covered with water. At no place was there any land that it was not under water. All air-breathing critters died. Animals, birds, snakes, finally mankind, except for Noah and his family and the critters with him. Well, how did he survive? How did they survive? Noah said, go build yourself an ark. Make it of gopher wood. So, got a question. Where on earth did he build the ark? I don't know either. And I'm not going to tell you where I think it might have been. No one knows. He says, also take with you every sort of food that is eaten and stored up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. And Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Okay, there are three basic phases of the flood. There's eruptive phase, there's a flooding stage, and there's a retreating and flood runoff stage about 4,500 years ago. This chart here you may recognize. It has been published by Michael Ord and Dr. John Reed, and I believe Tass Walker was involved with it to some extent. But it is a relative chart that shows the height of the flood. It shows the height of the flood, a relative height We don't know what the actual height was, depth was, other than we know that the mountains were covered with up to 22 cubits above that mountain. On the horizontal axis, we have the days of the flood, up to 371 days. This next chart is the same chart. I just simply redid it. That gave me the versatility to adding notes. As you can see, some of these things on the notes, and that's what you have in front of you. On the back side of that set of notes, if you didn't get one, there's some in the back, or maybe we've run out, I don't know. On the back side of that note, it gives the steps. And like here's step 1, there's step 2, step 3, 4, 5, etc., all the way over here to step 9. Okay? Now, those steps, in relationship to each step, is a scripture verse. I don't give the actual scripture verse in there, but it gives basically a description of what's going on. So 7 days before the flood actually erupted, before the water erupted, God has come on into the ark. So into the ark they went. That's not the exact word, of course. So Noah went into the ark, and he waited. Can't you imagine what they were waiting? We built this ark. Took us quite a few years to build this ark, boys. You say, yeah, Dad, where's the rain? 7 days went by. And then they probably heard a rumbling or a grumbling going on below the earth, maybe even felt the earth shake, likely did. Then all hell broke loose. It's what we call the eruptive stage, At that point in time, the fountains of the deep came up. The water level started rising. At about the 41st day, the ark likely was floating. We don't know for sure. That's an estimate that it was floating based on talking with Dr. Ord. This is what he thinks was going on. We're going up here to the top of the hill or the water level, and the 4th level. The flooding stops. The water level stops increasing. The ark is grounded, but the mountains are all covered. So a lot is going on at this stage of the flood, and that all comes from God's Word. You can look it up later if you wish. After that, then the water started retreating, going down. The level dropping is called the retreating stage of the flood. A lot of things were going on during that period of time. At the 225th day, he could see mountain tops. He could see them. Something was going on. He could see mountain tops. He probably felt the earth shake a little bit too, because at that time it's felt that the mountains were actually rising. So a mountaintop actually rose out of the water. But the water was also decreasing at that time. So 2 things were going on simultaneously. Then there was ravens. He sent out a raven. They didn't come back. He sent out doves 3 times. 2 times they came back. 3rd time he says, I'm out of here. I got a place to stay. Finally, at the 315th day, the ark cover was removed. But the water and the water was dry. The ground was dry. Okay. And then at the 371st day, they exit the ark. The big picture, general flood sequence. Okay. The eruptive phase from 0 to 40 days. All the fountains of the deep, hot, high-pressure water blasts out of the earth, thousands of worldwide volcanic events. The windows of heavens were opened. Massive rain, earth and debris, rocks, lava, sand, etc. Probably some of that was coming down and hitting on the top of the ark in terms of rocks that was going up and coming back down, hitting the roof. What was that, Dad? I don't know. Didn't sound good. Earth and debris, yeah. Flooding stage. The water was rising along with Mega tsunamis. Mega tsunamis. There's an interesting YouTube out by John Baumgartner right now where he talks about, it's brand new, where he talks about the tsunamis that happened. And so it's very few people have seen that. I saw it just the other night. Midwest Creation Fellowship, you go to their site and it shows the YouTube on there. Okay, so the flooding stage. Water was rising along with mega tsunamis. The water layers covered most of the earth to an average of 12,000 feet at the peak of the flood. This is new updated information. The big picture again, more steps. This is what happened during the flood. About the third step, the continent of Pangaea, the one central continent, started breaking apart. Now, if that broke apart, you know there had to be earthquakes and volcanoes. So continental spreading was starting to occur, and it was estimated at 5 miles an hour these continents were spreading apart. Today, these continents move at about a fingernail width every year. No, these were about 5 miles per hour. So water completely covers the earth above the mountains. Mega erosion, now redeposited as sedimentary layers. Okay? Continuing with the water completely covers the earth. Part of that step 2 would be sedimentary layers covers critters, trees, and peat matter. The critters start to petrify. Buried trees start to petrify. Buried peat matter, trees, plants, are compressed and heated by sediments. The result? Coal is forming. Other critters are floating. They're bloating and rotting. More with the big picture. Number 5, the retreating stage. The water's running now off of the continents, running at a very fast rate. The oceans and the earth basins deepen. The mountains rise up. So if you had all this water sitting there, and then all of a sudden the mountains start rising, the water is now heading downhill, aided by gravity. So the floodwaters are rushing off the continents. Serious mega erosion of pre-deposited sedimentary layers. The earth is denuded. There isn't one single tree or plant anywhere standing. Nothing visible alive is on the earth. The earth completely dries out. Step 7. Step 8, vegetation begins to grow. That's about the time, 371st day, Noah looks out and they start coming out of the ark. How do we know we had the eruptive flooding and retreating stage? From Genesis. That's how we know. Genesis 7:6 says, Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came. In Genesis 7:11, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep. When we say all the fountains, we're talking waters and volcanic fountains. They burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Genesis and verse 12, and the rains fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and the ark floats. The ark flood continues 40 days in the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. And the waters prevailed on earth 150 days. Genesis 8:3-16. Rather than go through the verses, these are the basic steps. You can read that for yourself. The water quit rising. The ark is grounded. The tops of mountains are seen. Noah sends out a raven. He didn't come back. Why didn't he come back? Ravens will eat most anything, and there's a lot of most anything out there to eat, floating around. So then he sends out a dove. It came back empty-handed. Then he sends out dove number 2 and came back with an olive branch. Things are looking up. He sends out dove number 3. He didn't come back. So the ark cover is removed. Saw the ground was dry. Later the ark cover is removed. The saw the ground was very dry. 2 different words, dry and then very dry. Very dry means you could go out there and walk out it without getting your boots or whatever they wore sink up to your knees. Up here where it was dry, I would say you probably wouldn't be walking very much out there. God says, leave the ark and take the animals. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So the book of Genesis records the 3 basic phases: the eruptive phase, the flooding phase, and the retreating phase, of which we've just looked at. The eruptive, flooding, and retreating. That basically is the flood. And that's what happened. The things that we see around our area today, the things that we see around Colorado, around the United States, around the world, are related to the runoff section of the flood, the last half of the flood. That's where the damage was done. That's where the gullies were formed, the deep canyons were formed. It was during that second half of the flood. So the flood eruptive stage, go through that a little bit more. Mechanisms of the flood were suddenly unleashed. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heavens opened. 40 days of extreme rain were unleashed. Likely earth and debris fell from the sky. Pangaea, the assumed original continent. There's other assumed original continents, but we'll just leave it at Pangaea right now. I believe most of the creationists believe that it was probably in the form of Pangaea instead of some of the others that have been proposed. So how did the fountains of the deep burst forth? There's different theories. A large meteorite blast, impact. A lot of people don't think so. A process called hydroplate theory. Dr. Walter Brown, that's his theory. A process called catastrophic plate tectonics. And then there's others. This talk is based on the catastrophic plate tectonics theory. That's what I believe it is, but who am I? Okay, pre-flood, we had the Pangaea. We had the fountains. Step 2, we had the fountains that birthed forth. Step 3, we had displacement of continents. At that point, you had the continents were starting to separate out. Where these are starting to separate, the fountains are burst forth, they're starting to separate, and catastrophic plate tectonics was taking place at that. Today we have plate tectonics. During the flood, we had catastrophic plate tectonics. The difference being plate tectonics, the continents are moving 1 fingernail width per year. During the flood, 5 miles an hour. That's a lot of, can you imagine that much mass moving at 5 miles an hour, and then these continents coming into this area and this area here were actually starting to crash into one another. When they started crashing into one another, that's how we get these mountains. That's how the Himalayas came forth. 2 continent plates started colliding. Something went up. Then we had the post-flood, and this is somewhat of a resemblance of what that's supposed to look like. Today, the seafloor, you have seafloor spreading areas. You can see that here. I think there's over 10,000 miles of seafloor spreading going on. It's pretty amazing the stuff that they talk about, and the difference in the magnetism, as they move away from the seafloor spreading. First it's north-south, and the south, then it's south pole, then it's north pole, and the south pole, north pole, south. Pretty interesting stuff about the magnetism changing as it moves away from that. And the windows of heaven are open. Upwelling magma jettisons steam into the atmosphere, causing intense global rain. Sea floor rising and cause displacement of the ocean water into the continents. The word says, you covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they took flight. The mountains rose, the valleys sunk down to the place you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so they might not again cover the earth. Meanwhile, back on the ark. This was not your normal cruise, but it was not your normal boat. How many people have been to see the ark? Okay. Do you remember the section when you're going through the ark and they show you how they juxtapose how the ark was put together, how they would layer different boards together? You remember seeing that? Yeah. It's kind of like when you just go in the door, there is a little display there, and it's cool. I'm a woodworker, and recently I've been a woodworker, and it's been fun being able to put boards together in different ways and making them stronger and using glue and making them really strong. The glue is so tight you can't rip that board apart. Anyway, they used glue also. We believe it was tree sap. Okay, so flooding stage. The flooding stage, Noah's flood was like a year-long flash flood. The flood was not a local flood like Katrina, but was a global worldwide flood that differed in size and intensity from any local flood. The Garden Eden, forget it. Gone forever, never to be found. You remember here a few years ago, we think we know where the Garden Eden is. You remember that? Yeah. Yeah. Nah. No one knows. No one knows. Flooding stage continued as the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Many plate tectonic movements, continental spreading apart, generated numerous earthquakes, resulting in an immense number of tsunamis. As the ocean floor plates pushed apart, molten rock emerged, creating a new ocean floor. The new ocean floor was dense, and it rose. And when the ocean floor rose, it pushed up the sea level, and it caused a surge of ocean water onto the continents. You have flooding. Superstorms were generated in the atmosphere as a result of supersonic steam jets, as the crustal fracture zones catapulting ocean water aloft before they fell down back to earth as torrential rain. I've been to the rainforest. I've been there a lot of times. And they get a lot of rain, but it was nothing like the rain that they had during Noah's flood. Flood water currents at 100 miles an hour. And I just heard another speaker, I forget the name right now, and he suggested that at the equator, this water was running, the currents were at about 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. Amazing. Can you imagine the erosion that was causing during that time? The Garden of Eden? Forget it. Twice daily tides. Tides, and yet, at that point, there were no mountains. So tremendous tidal surges moved across the submerged continents. Result, redistribution and pulverization of the sediments. Continuing, the first portions of the flood planed off much of the earth with violent tsunamis, following immediately with that material redeposited as sedimentary layers. More on that later. Some of you may have been down to Manitou Springs, and that's where this picture is taken. But this is called the basement rock down here, and it's what's at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. That's what's below us about a mile down. We're sitting here in the middle of, well, at the edge of the Denver Basin, so basement rock's down there someplace. This basin's all been filled up with sedimentary material, by the way, all filled up. And so, anyway, the basement rock has strata to it. Kind of interesting. Has strata to it. This is, I've read where they think this is a function of day 3 of creation, this strata, okay? But it's planed off, this section here. This is sectioned off. So the next slide shows sedimentary layers now redeposited on top of this planed off section of the basement rock. Pretty cool. And notice the sedimentary layers are going in this direction, where the original basement rock, they were going in this other direction. Here's the bottom of Grand Canyon. Here's Dr. Tim Clary from ICR giving a tour. I think this might have been last summer before last. Anyway, shows the same thing. There's a great unconformity with this differing layers that you see down here. Kind of hard to see in this picture, but they're there, okay? Then it was planed off. And there's the sedimentary layers right on top of it. Pretty cool? And that on top of it is the Tapeats sandstone layer. That's what we're seeing up there. That's the first layer over the basement rock, the Tapeats sandstone. You know, it stretches from Mexico to eastern Canada and all the way up into the Arctic Circle. Was this a worldwide flood? Or was this a worldwide flood? Hello? Here is a schematic of the Grand Canyon. And there's your Tapeats sandstone layer. There's your pre-flood basement rock. See the layers that they're showing here. And then on top of that, over here, they're showing flood layers right on top of that. So the flooding stage continues. Noah's floodwaters continue to rise, and sedimentary layers continued to accumulate, layer upon layer, layer upon layer, layer upon layer, as the surface of the earth was scoured, scraped, and redeposited. What are sedimentary layers? I gave a talk at Christian school up in Fort Morgan here about a year or so ago. I says, today we're going to learn about sedimentary layers. And the teacher came up, believe it or not, she came up to me and gave me a big hug. She says, oh, Paul, I'm so glad to know you. I thought, why? You taught me about sedimentary layers. I had no idea. It was pretty cool to hear that, you know. But she was excited to learn about sedimentary layers. Okay, what's the definition? Sedimentary layers, rocks, that often have distinctive layering or bedding. Many of the picturesque views of the desert Southwest shows mesas and arches made of layered and sedimentary rock of sandstone, limestone, and shale. This comes from the USGS government. And there's a classic picture of sedimentary layers, Grand Canyon. But that's not the only place that you'll see the sedimentary layers. This happens to be the Flint Hills of Kansas. See the layers? Now, next time you go down a road and you see those flat lines, don't do like I did years ago. And what's all those lines? Must have been put on there by the bulldozer when they made the road. Those are real sedimentary layers left over from the flood. The interesting thing about this one, come back here. All right, let's do this. What you see up here, notice how these sedimentary layers are terminated. This is a hillside, it's going down. This is Noah's flood evidence right here. The layer's been washed away, and that's a big gully down there, and they filled it in when they made the interstate here. And then there's another one. There's about 3 or 4 hills just like this. This is in central Kansas. Green River, near Dinosaur National Monument. Lots of sedimentary layers back in there. I kind of like this picture. It's pretty cool. This next picture is one that I really like. Carrot cake, one of my favorite. What happened to my carrot cake? There it is. How do you make a carrot cake? one layer at a time. One layer at a time. You put the cake on, then you put the frosting on, the cake on, the frosting on, the cake on, the frosting on, and you put a lot of nuts on top and whatever else you're going to put on top. Okay? But then you cut a section of it away. Oh, there it is, ready to eat. Oh, what do we have left? We have sedimentary layers. It's the same thing. Now I'll show you some other pictures I used to, of a hilltop I used to see when I was 10 years old. Same stuff, I didn't know of it. So meanwhile, back in the ark, and all flesh died and moved on the earth, birds and livestock, beasts and all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind, everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed in the earth 150 days. 151 days. The ark is grounded, the flood waters no longer rise, and from now on the waters would begin to retreat. So here it is, sitting here on the mountains of Ararat someplace. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Retreating stage. Second half of the flood. The last half of the flood, known as the water's retreating stage, it was the retreating stage that impacted what we see now on the earth. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. This period is divided into four general periods. You had massive sheet flow of water initiates water below water surface erosion. Massive sheet flow. We talked about up to 100 mile an hour, up to 1,000 mile an hour perhaps at the equator. Second, water accelerates the erosional section and the level lowers. Now we'll see more about this in a minute. The tops of the earth appear in the third phase. Now the tops of the mountains were appearing. This is maybe what Noah was seeing. The erosional section is rapidly increases. Fourth, the water's gone. The earth is left with water gaps and wind gaps. And the waters continued to abate, and the tops of the mountains were seen. The water was abating, it was running off the surface. The mountain tops were seen. The ocean was sinking. The catastrophic erosion was taking place. So here you go. Here we sit, right close to the continental divide. I guess we're right here. That's west, that's east. So we're sitting right here. The Rocky Mountains lifted up. All the mountain was around during that time, and they lifted up. In the meantime, the oceans are sinking. What's the water going to do? It's going to run off at an extremely rapid, fast rate, aided by gravity. Down she goes. The mountains comes up, the waters came down. And that's what you see when you look west at Long's Peak and Pikes Peak and the others. That's the result of these mountains here. Sheet flow of water. There's a series of slides I'm going to show here that show these four basic principles. The sheet flow of water flowing across a ridge begin to form shallow notches. Now the water's totally covering the earth here, okay? And then the notches start to erode as water level drops to the top of the ridge. The top of the ridges are now starting to become exposed, okay? Then the water level continues to drop as the notches deepen, but now the water's starting to really accelerate these because we now have a restricted opening or space for that water. So now we're going to get some serious erosion. We're going to have what might be called the water nozzle effect. As water narrowed into channels, it would accelerate and focus power. We see the principle as water flows from a water pipe into a narrow one, or I kind of think of a garden nozzle. The same amount of water must flow into and out of the pipe. So if the diameter narrows, the speed must increase, and thus the erosive action increases dramatically. You ever see a picture, a movie picture or YouTube of a dam, water dam, and it just starts to break over the top. And when it goes pretty soon that dam is gone in a very, very short period of time because the water is accelerating, its erosive power is enormous, and that's what's going on during this time. And that's what we see here. The end result, after the flood is over with, we have a water gap. It's called a water gap because there's a river running down through it, or a creek, something, okay? Or you have a wind gap because the only thing that goes through there is wind. So there's 4 stages are, and it's what I call one of the fundamentals of geomorphology, okay? And I'm indebted to writers such as Dr. Ord and Walker and Reed for this principle. This is where I learned this. I just read it in a book. You can do that too. Just read it in a book. Yep. Here's a wind gap example from Weld County. Weld County, if you don't know, is north of Morgan County. And anybody know where Pawnee Buttes is? Anybody know where Rattlesnake Buttes is? Same place. Yeah. If you ever seen the movie Centennial, and there's a book Centennial, it takes place up in Fort Morgan in that area. And they took Pawnee Buttes, and he changed the name to Rattlesnake Buttes because there's a lot of rattlesnakes up there, and there are a lot of rattlesnakes up there. And he tells some really good stories about rattlesnakes. Anyway, I'm digressing. So here's a wind gap. I was driving along Weld County Road 124. I look up there, and what's this? Here's a ridge line. It's going for miles, and all of a sudden there's an opening. Okay? So I go down to the end of this road, make a left-hand turn, and drive back up this way, and it's a wind gap. There's no water running through there. It's totally missing. And there's that same hillside back over here, but this is missing. There's a wind gap. Noah's flood evidence. Oh, that's pretty cool. In the 601st year of the first month to the first day of the month, the waters were dried off the earth. And Noah removed the opening of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. Unlikely little vegetation for man or beast at that stage. The end of the flood. The second month and the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, "Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you, and bring all the animals." I got a news flash for you, and I've got something for you. I just printed out today. Most of you know who Creation Ministries International is, right? Well, if you don't, you need to get acquainted with them because they have daily articles. And this one today is the geological history of Tasmania, Australia. Where's Tasmania? Well, I've been to Australia, and I'm thinking it was one of the states, and I had to look it up. I was wrong. It's been too many years ago. It's actually south of Australia, big island south of Australia. And anyway, in this article, in the second and third paragraph, and by the way, this article is sitting on the table back here. I printed off 7, so the first 7 gets it. Otherwise, go to Creation Ministries International. It was there today. Anyway, the second and third article paragraphs talks about the stages of the flood and what happened during the early stages of the flood. I thought the way it's written and described, I thought, I like that. I like the way they said it. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. So there's several copies in the back. So why is Colorado known as colorful Colorado? Could it be because of that scene or scenes like it? Colorado definitely deserved the name Colorful Colorado. And I don't know where this is at. Maybe some of you might know, but it's a beautiful scenery. And that scenery we wouldn't have if it hadn't have been for the effects of Noah's flood. So I'm looking at these mountains. I have climbed these 14. I have climbed 12 of the 52, I think it is, 14,000-foot mountains. I climbed 12 of them before I ran out of gas. And I just saw some amazing, awesome sights in climbing those 12. Pikes Peak was one of the hardest, by the way. But when did these mountains rise up? That's what I'm wondering. When did they rise up? On the 225th day of the flood, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen towards the end of the flood. That's when these mountains rose up, towards the end of the flood. So, if there's a worldwide flood, catastrophic flood, there ought to be plenty of evidence right here. So, March 2014, went to the doctor. He says, "You, Mr. Feltz, you have rheumatoid arthritis. You travel on the airplane a lot, right?" I said, "Yes, sir. I travel sometimes once a week. Sometimes, anyway, I fly a lot." He says, "You shouldn't get on airplanes anymore with rheumatoid arthritis." I had a business. So I knew I wasn't feeling very good. And so we went and prayed, Linda and I went and prayed, and we decided, let's shut down the business. We retired based on that meeting with the doctor. So I tell my friend who's a principal at the school, Christian school I was associated with, Riverview Christian School, and I says, "Paul, I just retired." "Good, I need a bus driver because I got hip surgery next couple days." So I became a bus driver. And I did a lot of things out there. I drove the bus. I did maintenance at the school. I supported teachers watching students during recess. However, the school had a largely abandoned library. And in that library let's go back here, was this book. I found this book. And that was the beginning of my search for Noah's flood. Because I was one of those, I had it all figured out. It says in Peter, 1,000 years are today. Today is 1,000 years to the Lord. So he created the earth in 6,000 years. Then I read something later that says that means he rested for 1,000 years. Kind of blew my... Anyway, I read this book, and it really opened my eyes to the reality of Noah's flood. It was real to me. It was real to me. And then I was telling my friend Jim Thamert. He runs upstairs and comes back with this book, In the Beginning by Walt Brown. I have since backed off on my readings of Walt Brown, but it was eye-opening to me. There's a lot of good stuff Walt has in his book, and he's a wonderful man. Okay. And so I was on my way to researching Noah's flood. There was so many things to look at. There was astronomy, there's creation, there's animals, there's biology, and I just kind of picked up on Noah's flood. I like rocks. And so that's where I started concentrating on the evidences for Noah's flood. So these books led me to the field of geomorphology, the study of the physical features of the earth. And the book of Genesis 6, 7, and 8, God's plan and dictated plans to Noah, okay? The flood, the beginning, the intensity, and the end. The more I read creation science books about the flood, the more I understood, and flood became a very real event for me. I could see the evidence all around me. I wanted to see more. So we came snowbirds. Right, Jim? We were talking about they were snowbirds for a while, or RVers for a while. So in winter we went to Arizona, and boy, do we see tons of flood evidence. Okay? But that was in Arizona, in the Grand Canyon and all. If the flood was worldwide, does that mean northeast Colorado? And that's what I had to find out. I started driving and looking. I was over in Washington County one day, over towards Akron, Yuma Ray, out east of Brush. We live in Brush. And my wife says, look, it was over there and says, look at that. What do you mean, look at that? Look at that. What is that? It's a butte. So I finds a road, and I'm able to drive to it a little bit closer. And then I found that road had a sign that had no signs on it. The gate was open. So I drove right up to Fremont's Butte. This picture shows a car, so you can kind of get a perspective. See the car under my cursor? You kind of see a perspective on that. But that is flood evidence. That's the first flood evidence that I found. I was excited. First, here's a little bit of definitions. What's in a name? Okay, we got butte, so that's pretty small compared to others. Okay, then you have a mesa. That's bigger. Think of the Grand Mesa over by Grand Junction, and they call it Grand Mesa because I think that's the largest mesa in the world, or at least around. I don't know for sure. Then there's the plateau. Anybody hear of the Colorado Plateau? A lot of you have. A lot of you haven't. I hadn't heard of the Colorado Plateau till I headed to Arizona one day, and I came out all these hills coming north out of Flagstaff, going down, down, down. And I talked to my daughter Janie. I says, boy, those are sure some hills. Yeah, you just came off the Colorado Plateau. I did? I didn't know it. So anyway, I learned something. Back to Fremont's Butte. Look at this. Do you see anything missing here? See this flat top up here? It's all flat on top. Look at this. Missing. This is washed away dirt from Noah's flood. Washed all that away. In other words, where I'm standing here taking this picture, I would have been buried in dirt before the flood came along. So the flood washed it away. So a definition of an erosion, that's an erosional remnant. So here's the definition. A feature of the landscape standing above the general level to which erosion has reduced its surrounding. Okay? Took a trip down to Amarillo where ICR was holding a large seminar in Amarillo, and was down there, and I saw something over here looked some more what we call flat tops when I was a kid. We call them flat tops. But I got down to Amarillo. I was talking to a fellow. I says, what are those things? He says, well, those are what we call the cap rocks. And here's another picture of it. The cap rocks. Their title for it. Okay? And look what's missing. There's a number of those down there. Those are Noah's flood evidence. And this area here is flat and planed off. Think of that as the planing action of the flood. And as it washed off, 60 to 100 miles an hour, was running off rapidly. Eventually something was hard, maybe the cap rock was hard, and it resisted the erosion of the water, and it stayed there. And there it is. But what about northeast Colorado? Logan County. So I was taking a drive around Logan County, north and west of Sterling. I ran across what turns out is No Name Butte. Turns out it belongs to my friend Harry Thompson. It's on his ranch. I says, Harry, what's the name of that butte? He doesn't have a no name. Has no name. No Name Butte. But there's flood evidence right there. It's all washed away. And all there is that flat top. After the sheet erosion and channel erosion, nothing left but No Name Butte. What about Weld County? Oh my, Weld County. Weld County has so much flood evidence, including Pawnee Buttes. Let's give you a perspective. Here's where I live. My home is in Brush. Northeast Colorado Creation Group, we hold our meetings over here in Fort Morgan, just 10 miles from here. So about 40 miles up here, up here is the Pawnee National Grasslands, and up right about in this area is what we call the Buttes, Pawnee Buttes. And so there's Greeley, Loveland, Fort Collins. Get your perspective. So there's where we're at. So that's Weld County. Is actually this whole section here is Weld County. So especially up in here, tremendous flood evidence. You have Pawnee Buttes. You have the Chalk Bluffs. You have seashells. I haven't found them yet, but they say they're up there. Planed off surfaces, huge gravel bars, large erosional remnants, tons of river rocks up there. Petrified wood, you bet. Over here on this table, by the way, is some petrified wood. I'll show you a picture of it in a little bit. And this table is for stuff for you to come look at right up front here, front of the screen. And there's at least 3 gravel quarries up there. Now, wait a minute. We live on the flatlands, the prairie. No mountains, no rivers up there. That's well above the rivers. Closest river is 40 miles away. The gravel guys got their heads on it. Has 3 gravel quarries up there, and they're mining gravel out of there. Pretty cool. Pawnee Buttes, looking south of Pawnee Buttes. Erosional remnants. Remember our layered cake? Missing the strata. Okay. You look up here, you see the layers. There's our layered cake again. And what's left is the stratas that you can see, and here's with the water that was all washed out. Okay, there's 4 types of water erosion at the retreating stage of the flood. We talked a little bit about that. Sheet flow, 100 miles an hour. Sheet flow evolved into channelized flow. Even water level evolved to almost total channelized flow. Finally, in the end, all that's left is water gaps and the absence of water, and there's the 4 different types that we mentioned. Channelized water erosion. That is where most of the damage was done that we see on the earth, is this channelized section. The water accelerated, going at a fast rate, doing some serious damage. That's what happened here. Pawnee Buttes, looking south, looking west. Over here, looking there towards the northwest. Okay, so imagine water at the imaginary level, at this level, running across here. After a while, it starts digging, it finds a foothold, starts digging the earth down, and makes a spillway. Now you have a spillway. This is called the Chalk Bluffs along there. The Chalk Bluffs run almost 100 miles, from almost to I-25 to almost to Sterling. Amazing, Chalk Bluffs. Okay. And then after that, you have channelized flow erosion that went down here and washed this section out. That's we believe happened to Pawnee Buttes. The nozzle effect. As the water narrowed into channels, it would accelerate, which would focus its erosional power. Northeastern Weld County, same place. Numerous river rocks and gravel bars. We're still in the same area, but the northeastern part of Weld County. They're almost 1,000 feet higher than the South Platte River, 1,400 feet higher than the North Platte River. Secular geology says the flood never happened. I first heard that on an ICR, one of the 12 sets of Understanding the Mysteries of Genesis. I think it's the name of it, 12 series. And I forget the moderator. Boy, was he good. And Marcus. Anyway, he says, geologist says, flood never happened. I'd never heard that before. So I was still learning at that point. So let's look at the evidence. First, before we get there, what's a river rock? About my part of the world, you don't see river rocks unless you go out to the bank and they use them as displays, as decoration around there, but the river doesn't have any river rocks in them. It'd be hard to find one under. So I have to show them what river rocks look like, okay? And this happens to be a Poudre Canyon, by the way, Poudre River, okay? So I have identified gravel bars known to geologists as lags. So the definition of a lag is a lag deposit is a deposition of material winnowed by physical action. Lag deposits are found in the processes such as central island formations in streams and rivers. In streams and rivers. I just said in this previous slide where we're going to see some river rocks were 1,000 and 1,400 feet above any rivers, so there's no river. We're going to see some. So strong currents eroding the uplifting western United States would have pulverized much of the rock, but most of the resistant rock would have been carried far from their source and deposited as a lag or as a basin fill. Michael Lord. Here's a picture of a lag. This is in excuse me. Again, northeastern Weld County. That is an aerial view from Google Earth. You're looking at a half-mile long lag. A half-mile long lag right through here. This is County Road 153, 192. Okay. Now look at this X. We're going to see it. Next slide, you're going to see a picture where we're going to look endwise up to the end of this lag. Okay. So here comes the picture. Now you're looking at the end view of that lag. See how it's shaped? Kind of like a cone. The whole thing is shaped like a cone for a half mile long. Okay. And it's almost nothing but river rocks. Look at this. River rock. Let me see if I can magnify this. I think I can do this. Look at that. There's my business card. So it gives you an idea of the rocks that we're dealing with here. The whole thing is just covered with river rocks. And just west, a few miles, is another gravel bar. And it's in line with a gravel bar we just viewed, that we just looked at here. So let's look at that. Let's look at that next one. Okay, it's on what I call Cemetery Hill. It's north of the New Raymer graveyard. Okay, and so I saw that one too, driving up this county road, heading towards the Buttes. Well, what's that? So I had to go over and look at it. I know this graveyard goes right up to it. So I drove up into the graveyard, and you can go right through there and drive around, and you get to a fence. You can get out across the fence. You walk right up on top of this thing. So here I'm up on top. Now I'm looking back east at the gravel bar, which you can just barely see here in the distance, about a mile or 2 miles down. Here's the same gravel bar, another gravel bar, another one. It's in a narrow line, just like that one is. Just like that one is. What's on top? River rocks. Same thing. No river. So back here in the distance, the far distance, is Pawnee Buttes. There's just a couple nubs. You probably can't see them out there. But here's this next picture. There's Pawnee Buttes. You see anything missing? A lot of dirt missing there, isn't there? You imagine how much dirt has been hauled away? Can you imagine a guy with a truck and a digger, and how many years it would take to haul all of that away? Wow. Yeah. See anything missing? All that remains of the sediment is Pawnee Buttes. The dirt is missing. I mentioned petrified wood. Yeah. This is called ironwood, and that's what's one of the things that's sitting on the table over here is ironwood. Okay? pretty strange stuff. My friend Carl, who's speaking, by the way, next month on honeybees, he's got some property just south of here, of Pawnee Buttes, and he was working along there, and he saw something on the ground and kind of went up and kicked it. There was no kick in that thing. It looks like a piece of rotten fence post, probably what he was thinking. It is solid rock, solid wood. I took it to Arizona, and I had it cut right down through the center, so you can kind of see it. It's pretty amazing to see what it looks like inside. Okay? All right, more. Larimer County. Larimer County is where I moved to in 1951 from Missouri. As a 10-year-old kid, we drive up and down 287 from Fort Collins to Virginia Dale, where I lived, and we would see flood evidence, but I had no idea what I was seeing. It was a place called Steamboat Rock, and a pretty famous rock. Years later, I climbed up from the backside of that rock and found a whole bunch of dates and old dates dating back to the 1800s of people when they went through there, because this is actually part of the overland rail, the trail, stagecoach station used to go through here also. But it's amazing. Look at that. As a kid, I look at that. Isn't that neat? Look at that steamboat, Mommy. But wait a minute. What I was missing is how do we get all those straight lines? Look at the straight lines here. Where did all that come from? It never dawned upon me to ask the question, and no one that I asked would have known anyhow, so it probably didn't matter. So, yeah. So, how about Castle Rock, Don? How did he get there?
Didn't the city build it?
Somebody just moved it there. Morgan County, that's where I live. All right, let's look at Morgan County, some of the evidence. All right. The place when you take off on Highway 52 and go north on 52 and go straight north, and you end up ultimately up here in Nebraska. But usually it's very flat, very straight, few gentle hills. But you get about 10 miles north of Fort Morgan, and all of a sudden, the road takes some very steep curves. And you better slow that puppy down, because you're going to end up where you don't want to end up. Turns out it's called the Wildcats, and it's called Wildcat Creek up through there. That is a flood evidence. Didn't know that till later. So Wildcat Creek is seasonal at best. It runs, it disappears, and then it runs. Secular geologists would say that likely the creek carved it. They say the same thing about Grand Canyon. The Colorado River carved it in 6 million years. I know, because I'm a scientist. Creation geologists say not enough water. I believe Wildcat Canyon is a flood remnant by channelized erosion. Let's look at that. First of all, you had the sheet erosion coming down predominantly from the northwest, traveling down to the southeast, traveling this direction. So that's sheet erosion, first stage. Okay, here's the future Wildcat Canyon. Okay, and then the next thing you have channelized erosion. It started working a channel out here. A little bit of water still running over here, but working a channel, which is the second stage of that. Okay, and then finally you have the stage that you have today. It's an erosional remnant. I don't know whether to call it a wind gap or a water gap, because the water runs sometimes it doesn't water, so it's kind of like, yeah. But it's famous today. There's a lot of birding up there, beautiful. That's a place I should take you sometime, Ed, is there. There's some wonderful birds, and there's an artist, by the way, that did watercolors with birds, and you would just really eat that up. I forgot that. I should have mentioned that to you, Ed. Ed was up, and I showed him some of these places here some time back, and so I found out he likes birds. Okay, seashells and coal lignite in southwest Morgan County. Are you kidding me? Yes. Again, looking around Morgan County, where is the flood evidence? I heard about a hill called Bitwell Hill. The Army had gone to Bitwell Hill to put up an antenna and test it out as for some kind of repeater station. And so, okay, I says, if it was a hill and they wanted to make a repeater station of it, it must be a high hill. Well, if it's a high hill in Morgan County, I got to go see this hill. So we went down Road 3, which runs down through here, Road 3, and we finally found what looks like a hill. Not a very impressive hill. Very low-level hill. It's like nothing. You wouldn't even think about it, you know. So anyway, so we kept driving up the road. And I was just about ready, well, honey, about time to head on back up the road. So I look over and I says, wait, what is that? What am I looking at? Turns out it was a gravel pit. Gravel pits are good to go to, by the way. It's a gravel pit. And I says, what am I looking at over there? So I took the liberty of driving into the gravel pit. Later on, I got the property owner's name. And I get permission every time I go and call up. He had no problem. He just appreciated me calling. And I'm looking at this, and I'm seeing all kinds of stuff. Ultimately, I have to call my friend Ed. And so Ed's up there. He's doing his thing. He's photographing. He's analyzing. And he says, yep, Paul, that's coal up there. That's a layer of coal down there. And we found out from the owner of the property that 30 feet down, there's a 4-foot layer vein of coal. Lignite. It's a poor grade of coal, but they used to mine that around here a lot in years of old. And just below, about 15 or 20 feet below where Ed is standing, you have seashells. Look at those seashells. I have, again over in this table, and I want you to come up and look at it after this is over with. I have the seashells, and anybody under the age of 18 is welcome to have a seashell. Hopefully we won't run out, so you're welcome to them. And I can get a lot more. There's a lot more back there. Right, Ed? Yep, right more. Lots of them there. I could bring them down by the truckload. In fact, the farmers dig those eggs out and feed them to the chickens to give them calcium. Pretty cool, huh? So anyway, they're called mullocks. The mullock types. I don't know anything about Ed, I said, what kind of shell is this, Ed? He said, I don't know what kind of shell it is. I don't know anything about shells. I don't either. So all we know is they're shells. Okay. Then one day I took the administrator of the school up, and guess what he finds? He finds, I can't find, one of these spiral shells right here. He just walks up to it and digs it out. Doggone. Boy, was he lucky. Okay, so here's what I dug up. And when you dig them up, they're in a mud flow. It's clearly mud. You know it's mud because you scrape it off, put it in a pan, and you take it home. Shells, dirt, and all. At that time, in this case, it's dirt. Then you fill the pan with water, and all the mud, the dirt goes to the bottom. You pick it up. It's nothing but mud. It's a mud flow. And these are some of the shells that I picked up. I took a picture here of it one day. So what you have here is an interesting situation. You have at the very top, starting at the very top, this is wind-blown sand. Where did the wind-blown sand come by from? Anybody know? A dust storm? Whatever you're saying, I can't hear you now, so I shouldn't have asked the question. I'm really hard of hearing. Basically, it's another story we need to talk about sometime. But it is the end of the Ice Age. Brought all the dust that we have around in northeastern Colorado and in Nebraska. The end of the Ice Age was that, but I can tell you more about that later. But in the very top, you have dust, sand, blown sand. Then you start getting down here to sedimentary layers. Then you have a layer of coal. Then you have more sediment, more layers of whatever it is. Then down here you have more coal. Then you have more layers of whatever it is. And then you have all these seashells. And it's amazing. These seashells actually in certain sections of this particular bluff, they're hardened. They're hardened into rock. And I had a friend of mine, he says, I'm going to take one of these home for Bell Rock Garden. So he grabbed one of them and put it in. Bruce Malone was here a while back. I took Bruce down to this place, or actually one over the hill from that. And he picked one up in his already totally overloaded car, and he put that in his car, and he took it all the way back to Midland, Michigan with him. So, yeah, there's lots of seashells up there. And I'm not going to belabor this because we just went through that. So, Morgan County coal. What about this coal that we're seeing in this previous slide here? Coal is compressed plant matter that has been altered by an oxygen-free hot environment. That's what it says. That's what it does. The oxygen-free hot environment was caused by deep burial sediments. Now let's go back and look at that. Deep burial sediments. That doesn't look so deep to me. Maybe that's 6 or 8 feet. I wouldn't call that deep. I could dig that with a shovel given enough time. That's not deep. Not enough heat, in my opinion. There. So what is that saying to you? What it says to me? What it says to me, that coal formed, but there's an awful lot of sedimentary layers up here someplace. How many hundreds or thousands of feet has been washed away? In the meantime, and before that, it turned into coal. Okay. So the oxygen-free hot environment was caused by deep burial sediments. This, of course, means that the coals typically form under high pressure. Okay? So here's another area that it's actually the area that's over the hill from that place. That's in the Urker property. And this is new on this particular slide. It's another pit. This was the second one that we went to, Ed, of those two. Okay. But what I like about this is interesting and fascinating about this is how these sedimentary layers were obviously put in under high pressure. There's sorting, band sorting of this. And let me see if I can amplify this so you can see this. And so you have layers here. Does this do this or does this not do this? I can't walk it up or down. Okay, let's get back. But maybe you can see it from there. There's actually sedimentary, there's layers of seashells here, a layer of dirt or something here, more shells here, then more dirt here, then more shells here, and a mixture of shells. The black ones, I think, are oyster shells. And then more dirt here, and then finally there's more shells. You can't see them in the bottom of this picture way down here, but there's more shells here, and they just keep going. And the fun time to go up there is after it's had a lot of rain, because you don't even have to dig them out of the bluff. They wash down, and you can just pick them up off the ground. So were these deposited by a calm ocean setting? I don't think so. I mean, these were deposited under high flow water conditions. Over here, on this table, is what looks like a fruit jar. I told Jim when I walk in, I got my hooch. No, that is a fruit jar. What's in that fruit jar? Well, I'll tell you. It's got water, and it's got road gravel. I took that fruit jar, went down, filled it half full of road gravel, and I took it home, filled it full of water, shook it up real good, and let it set. But sedimentary layers. It's been setting now for about 2 years without being moved, with the exception of the bumpy road coming down from Fort Morgan area. But take a look at that when you get there. You can actually see the sedimentary layer. You can do that at home. You can do that at home. Okay, Morgan County, Morgan Sand and Gravel, another place here in Morgan County, just north of Fort Morgan, and here it is, just above Fort Morgan. Okay. Big gravel pit there. Ed and I was there the day I took these pictures, and went over to this particular wall. It's kind of an interesting wall, and we looked at that, and I saw chalk. Chalk, really? Is that really chalk? So I picked up a piece off the ground, and I says, "Yep, that's chalk." Ed confirmed it was chalk, so I felt good about that. So then, what you want to think of chalk is think of the White Cliffs of Dover. Okay? Same thing. Same stuff. So I took it home and got a friend's microscope, pretty basic microscope, okay? And the best I could get was some kind of an outline, looked like lines like this, kind of fingers-like. But I found out that, and that's as best as I could amplify it. But then I looked up, looked a little bit deeper, and found out what I had is a forum, a single-celled organism. Look at those, there's those same fingers. See that? Does that remind you of Fibonacci's number? Yeah, yeah. And look at the width of this. This is 1/10 of 1,000th of an inch, or 30 times larger. A hair in hair is 30 times larger than that. So pretty small stuff. And I was actually able to see that, so I was pretty impressed. There's Ed, and he's looking at that. How many sedimentary layers can you count? Wow! Look at all them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Look at this, and there's cross-bedding right there. Isn't that cool? Look at cross-bedding. I love cross-bedding. See the cross-bedding? High flow, okay? All right. So I talked to the pit manager about this stuff. He says, when you see that, there has to be a flood. He didn't say Noah's flood, but he said it has to be a flood. Now, granted, we're only about 10 miles from the river, and we're still not that far above the river, so it actually could have been possibly a river flow. So after reading the book by Dr. John Morris, titled The Global Flood, Unlocking Earth's Geologic History, his recommendation was don't just read and look at the pictures. Go out, cover, and take your own pictures. And that is what I have been doing with God's leading since 2014. When the rainbow is in the clouds, I see it, and when it is in the clouds, I will see it, and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creatures of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. God had the last word.